Support for the CU podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Big news, Manscaped has just released their new cologne scent to help you feel good and smell good all over.
Yeah, don't be a stinky Sam. Everyone knows Manscaped has the perfect package 3.0 for all your below-the-waist grooming needs. But they didn't stop there. Complete your grooming game with the new refined cologne signature scent by Manscaped. With the same signature scent that all Manscaped formulas contain, this cologne is a perfect complement to the collection. Light, approachable, and gentlemanly in all the right ways. Think of it as your wingman for the night to keep you fresh and ready for anything.
It tops you off. You want to hang out with a special someone, or if you want to, feel good about yourself, you get a little spritz and you're good to go.
Be sure to check out the Perfect Package 3.0 with all the essentials for your below-the-waist grooming needs, including the Lawnmower 3.0 trimmer and various crop formulations, including ball toner and deodorant.
All right. You can get a special offer now. 20% off and free shipping with the code CU Podcast at manscaped.com. That's 20% off at manscaped.com with code CU Podcast. Get going. Smell good. Look good and feel good with Manscaped. All right, Ian, do you want to do a Q&A or do the voice?
Let's hold off on voice. Let's do an old school Q&A today.
Okay, old school Q&A. Q&A time on the CU Podcast. This is from at Nerdchan. Ian, are older games, this is simply to you, are older games such as NES, SNES, gonna lose value over time like the Atari? Also, great job on the Christmas episode, Pat. Well, thank you.
So, yes, they will. I don't think very few items in any collectible market are going to be worth what they are going to be worth the same amount of money over a long period of time. As people get older and people who grew up with something die off or get out of hobbies, there is not a 1-to-1 ratio of replacements of people who are just getting into this hobby to find it interesting. So the value is going to fall. Pat and I talk about it all the time, but it's we've mentioned it a few times on here, but it's one that Vani brings up too, because she's seen it working in the comic shop. They deal with a lot of collectibles too. A great example is Elvis stuff. Elvis stuff used to be highly collectible, sought after. There used to be lots of Elvis statues, Elvis plates, Elvis, I'm sure, muffin tins and things like that.
I'll look that up. Elvis muffin tin.
Give it a look-see. But as Elvis becomes less and less relevant to modern day audiences, these people suddenly found themselves with lots of stuff that they could no longer sell, stuff that might have been worth a lot of money to other Elvis collectors when they got into it.
It's boomer shit.
I really like model trains, and I've had a lot of people who are into model trains tell me, well, we're having a tough time finding that new generation of the hobby. They were like, they've always told me, and I just don't have the space for it, but they're like, come out to every year. They do like 2 flea markets every year, like one of the local model train clubs. And he's like, you should just see, he's like, the quality of stuff that gets let go for nothing. Yeah. And I mean, I feel bad because this is an old guy. Like,
it's probably like World War II era shit.
He's like white hair, old guy, but he's like really nice because I'm talking with him, and I know some of the lingo for model trains, and we're talking
A-train, what is it? A scale, H scale, O scale. I know that stuff.
So we started talking about that, and he was really like trying to get me to go because he's like they don't give it away. He's like, but you can get a lot of great stuff for like very little money at these little swap meets we do every year.
Sure.
And so it's the same thing with console games.
Yeah.
I don't think Nintendo and Super Nintendo games will ever drop as low as Atari specifically, and the reason being is I think it's easier to enjoy a Nintendo or Super Nintendo game without having nostalgia attached to it than it is an Atari game. A lot of those Atari games are very crude, rudimentary, very rough graphics, simple control schemes. And while there are some fun ones, I like almost all of the Activision Atari stuff. To me, is still playable in short bursts. I like a lot of it. Something like Mario 3 is going to be more naturally appealing to someone, I think, than, I don't know, a game of Haunted House. Zelda is going to hold more appeal over time than Adventure. But we are already we were starting to see the decline in NES prices last year, and that got a freeze when COVID hit.
They got a boost because of COVID. People are
Yes,
spending money on this shit again. I'm looking at price charting real quick. So
They jumped back up again a little bit.
a lot. Like some of these games went double. Like Super Mario Brothers 3, December 2019 on price charting was $8. It went up to $20 in November of 2020.
Wow.
It doubled over a year.
Probably a little Christmas bump there too.
Little Christmas bump, but it was still up to like, let's just say in the middle of the year, it was like $15.
No, I believe you.
So it went up 50%, Pat math.
Had COVID not hit, though, it would be. I would.
It would have stayed the
it
same
would
or
have
went
been-
down. Well,
Yeah, it would have stayed the same, or it would have dropped. So we're already kind of there. But like I said, I do think that people see them as having perhaps a little bit more inherent value. So I don't think they will go quite as dirt cheap as Atari games.
I think you're giving. Okay, I think you're right in some aspect, but you're also giving, I think, the younger generation a little more much credit that I think not that they deserve, but that they don't care about even the NES stuff, or even to some extent the Super Nintendo as much as we do. Even though the NES games are still very playable, it's not like playing Pitfall when you play Super Mario Brothers. That's even too primitive for someone who's like 20 years old.
Sure, and we've talked about that before on here because people complain about like the NES games that get dropped on the eShop.
Yes, where I want to strangle them.
As opposed to the Super Nintendo games. So, no, I agree. I just think it will take...
But even the Super Nintendo, they're like, well, I want GameCube games. Super Nintendo's is too primitive.
I just think it will take longer for the prices to get lower, and the bottom will be higher than the bottom was for Atari. I think the cheapest Nintendo games will go. I think Nintendo games will hold some value higher than Atari games.
I'm trying to find this article that I was going to bring up because it was like a stupid, like it was like the top 10 Nintendo systems of all time. Like it all the major ones besides Virtual Boy. Like it ranked all the ones, and it put like the top 3. Anyone will probably agree at this point would be in any order you want: NES, Super Nintendo, and Switch are probably the top 3 Nintendo consoles. All things considered, popularity, first party games.
Oh, the Wii. But I mean, if you want to look at quality, I agree. If you look at popularity, you can't deny that the Wii was just insanely popular. But I'm
talking about everything together.
Sure.
So, but the whole point is this kid that wrote this article, How to Be a Kid, put the NES 5th on this list. 5th. And the Super Nintendo was around in the middle of the pack as well. And his reasoning, I wish I could find the fucking article because the person added me, and it was like I was going to bring it up and not make sense. He said, like, well, these games are super primitive, and like games like Metroid are so primitive because Prime comes out and you don't play Metroid anymore. So it was the same sort of weird thinking about, well, these were nice at the time, but who cares? So I'm telling you, the younger kids may not give a shit about even the NES games or maybe even Super Nintendo games.
No, I agree.
Forward. It was. I didn't want to talk about the article because it was so bad, Ian. It put the GameCube number 1 out of all of that. It's like people like the GameCube, and in the GameCube list of games, he listed all these third-party games that are on the system that were on other systems too. So it's like your argument is moot at that point. If it's like, well, this is why the GameCube's good. It had Resident Evil something on it. It's like, what? Because it had Resident Evil 4 on it or whatever. That's not a reason to like the GameCube. Anyway, it was infuriating. And now I wish I had it down. Oh, I found it. I'm gonna paste it right now. It's a Screen Rant article. So you go read. We're gonna go over this NES one real quick. Where is it? I'll paste it right here. There, just pasted it in. Pasted it in right there. All the Nintendo consoles ranked. This is changing the conversation. All Nintendo home consoles ranked worst to best, and Virtual Boy's not in here, and it's no handhelds. Number 7. Nintendo Wii U. You don't have a big disagreement with there. Wii U was a spectacular failure with very few reasons. Number 6, Nintendo Wii. I would not disagree with that. Number 5, the NES. And then it goes into rough. He called these NES games rough drafts of the classic Nintendo series that haven't aged well. A fangul to you. Number 4, Nintendo 64. They put the 64 in front of the NES, this person. Switch, number 3. Number 2, the Super Nintendo. And number 1, Nintendo GameCube. Number 1, Nintendo GameCube. It's just nuts. Yeah, he included Resident Evil 4 as an outstanding single-player experience. That wasn't an exclusive game, by the way. And that wasn't the best version of it.
It was supposed to be an exclusive game, but it wasn't.
Then he lists some of the other first-party stuff. So anyway, So this shows you the mind of someone who's probably a lot younger than us writing this article that disrespects the NES and puts it near the bottom of the fucking pack and puts the N64 above the NES when it comes to overall importance. That's insane.
It's a little wild.
It's just wild stuff.
A little wild.
So anyway, so what was I getting back to?
The price of Nintendo and Super Nintendo.
So
games.
they're gonna drop off again. After
Yes.
all this, Nintendo, Ian's waiting for all of them to come through the door again. The people that bought this stuff the past year to come right back through the door, the revolving door.
We kind of need it. We could use some fucking stock right now.
Look around here, Ian. Pick some off the shelf. Give you some credit later. Start picking up random games here. So yeah, it's gonna happen. It's just the time limit. We go back to model trains is a big one. Elvis collectibles is a huge one. This is boomer stuff. Once you get to boomer age, once you get to like your late 50s, your 60s, or 70s, you don't care about holding on to this crap anymore. It goes back out into the wild.
Right.
It goes, or you die, and your kids get this shit, and it's like, I don't want this shit. I don't like Elvis. I don't like model trains. If my father has some of his model train stuff from when he was a kid still, from the 50s, he has that stuff. If I get that stuff, I'm going to look at it and be like, I either put this on my shelf, I set it up once and play it at Christmas, or set it up. What am I going to do with this shit? Try to put it on eBay and see if anyone buys this shit? What are you going to do?
I mean, even in the realm of video games, we've seen, large collectors and influential figures pass away, and their collection gets sold. They don't have someone. I mean, it's not staying within the family. It's not being passed down from one generation to the next. People lose interest.
But when it's sold, you might not necessarily get it all at retail cost because it's so much stuff to sell too. There was that one in New Jersey, that auction we talked about a couple years ago, where all that shit was being sold off from that collector. It was nuts. They hired an actual auction house to sell the shit he had. It was insane. We didn't go over the specifics of what it was sold for, but there was a ton of stuff. But even probably comic books is going to hit that. There's so many comic books out there that are not worth anything that we collected even in the 90s that we collected that are not worth anything. No one's going to want that shit. No one wants the baseball cards and hockey cards we collected in the 80s and 90s. It's all worthless. It was worth something to us for a bit, and now it's not worth anything. And it won't be worth anything to... I have kids, they would toss all that shit immediately. They would toss most of my comic books. Probably 95% of my comic books are worthless if I go through them. Be like, well, I can't even give away some of these. Around the Vonnie, she would laugh at me and throw them at me. Except for some of the Silver Age stuff, some of the first appearance stuff like Iron Fist, and it's like, okay, some of that, but even the condition's not that great. It's better than average, but it's, it comes back to this. Since you value it the most, it's the peak of collectability to you right now. Like, that's it.
Right.
You're it. After that, it's all downhill from there. There's no reason, if you didn't grow up with this shit, that's another generation after you is going to value it more than you. Nostalgia is tied a lot to this collectability of these things. So that's pretty much the long and the short of it. And for Atari, that's the case in point. They're dying out. They're getting older. They're the the boomer age, the Atari collectors. So even the rare stuff, I'm looking at right now on eBay. I got a save search for some of this rare stuff, and it's like, yeah, this is cool. But after this is it. This is it. Chase the Chuck Wagon. 50 years from now, no one's going to care about Chase the Chuck Wagon.
Yeah.
What is it even worth? Chase the Chuck Wagon.
Last I checked, it was worth like 100. I don't know. That was years ago though, and that was years out from the last time I checked.
90 or best offer, you can buy it. That's down from where it used to be.
Yeah.
You used to spend more than that on a Chase the Chuck Wagon.
Oh yeah. No, I remember when I first got into Nintendo collecting, I think that was like a $500 game. I mean, Chase the Chuck Wagon was the name of that.
The website.
I mean, it's
$100 for the cart. It's $100.
That was known at the time to be like the rarity that everyone wanted.
And no one gives a shit anymore. Nope. About stuff like that. Maybe Pepsi Invaders. That'd be a cool one because that was a weird promo one. Does anyone out there have a Mr. Boston on Vectrex? That's the weird one I want. I almost got one at one point. But I don't want to spend
that's still worth money.
Yeah, because there's like none of those at all. But something like that, is there just the sweet spot where there's not many of them, but how many people are Vectrex collectors that would want that?
Right.
That even might take a nosedive in the future.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Could.
It's so weird. You're going to find that Mr. Vectrex, or Mr. Vectrex. You're going to find a Vectrex museum in 30, 40 years if someone has that displayed. So... anything else to add? We missed out any other tchotchkes? Oh, Mark's toys from the 50s are worthless. Those were big in the 90s at toy shows.
What were?
Like the little figure, little toy soldiers, the little plastic feet like Army Men stuff. They had the Revolutionary War figures. They had Fort Apache, Cowboys and Indians. That shit was that's what people were looking for at toy shows I used to go to. When I was looking for Star Wars stuff in the early to mid 90s, it was people like my father who were in their 40s looking for shit when they were kids or in their 30s. And that was the Mark shit from the 50s to like the 60s. Like that was it. That was the stuff. And the G.I. Joe toys from the 60s. I guarantee you they're not worth as much as they used to be. Guarantee you, without even looking it up, that those the 12-inch G.I. Joes from the 60s aren't worth what they used to be 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. Because they're getting older, and I don't give a shit about that. I want my 80s stuff. And now the 80s G.I. Joes are worth a hell of a lot more than they used to be even 5 years ago. It's all cycles. All of it is cycles. All right, we done?
We're done.